My stepmother said I abandoned my dad's home. The utility bills proved. She lied. My name is Vera Cross, and I was 34 the Tuesday afternoon my father's estate attorney called me and said there was a matter he needed to discuss with me before the next family meeting. His name is Howard Bassett. He had been my father's attorney for 18 years. He called at 2:37. His voice had the specific, careful quality of a man delivering information he finds uncomfortable to deliver, but that he has decided the recipient deserves to have. He said he wanted to make me aware that certain statements had been made in a preliminary meeting he had conducted with my father and stepmother the previous Friday. He said he did not want me to be blindsided. He said he thought it was important that I have the opportunity to respond with documentation before the formal estate planning session. I said what statements. He said my stepmother had told him that I had effectively abandoned the family home. He said she had told him I had not been maintaining the property. He said she had told him I had not been paying the household expenses. He said she had told him I had not been present in any meaningful way for the past several years. He said she had used the word abandoned specifically. He said it twice in the meeting. He said she had suggested that given my abandonment of the home and my father's declining health, the property should be handled differently in the estate plan than my father had originally intended. He said my father had been present in the meeting. He said my father had said very little. He said my father's condition made it difficult for him to engage fully in complex discussions. He said he wanted me to know before Saturday. I said, Howard? He said, yes. I said, I have been paying the utilities on that house for 6 years. He said, I see. I said, gas, electric, water, internet, trash collection. I said, every month. I said, for 72 months. I said, my name is on every account. I said, I have every bill. He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, bring them on Saturday. He said, bring all of them. He said, bring whatever documentation you have regarding the property. He said, I will make sure there is time in the session to review them. I said, Howard? He said, yes. I said, thank you for calling me. He said, I have known your father for 18 years. He said, I knew his first wife. He said, I know what that house means. He said, bring everything. I said, I will. I hung up. I sat at my desk. I thought about 6 years, 72 months, every utility bill, every payment confirmation, every account in my name on a house I had been told was still my home. Then I opened my filing cabinet. I started pulling folders. Welcome back to 2 a.m. Revenge, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever been called absent from the place you were quietly keeping alive, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. The house on Mercer Street is the house I grew up in. My father bought it in the year I was born. A craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood that had changed around it twice since then and had always maintained the specific quality of a place where people stayed. My mother died when I was 22. Inside that house, in the bedroom at the top of the stairs, with the window that looked at the oak tree she had planted when I was 4. After she died, my father lived in the house alone for 3 years. I visited every Sunday. I drove 40 minutes each way. I brought groceries and stayed for dinner and left when it was dark and drove back to my apartment and called him when I got home. He called it the Sunday arrangement. He said it was the thing he looked forward to most each week. I said me too. I meant it. Viv arrived in the 4th year. My father met her at his church's grief support group. She had lost her husband 2 years earlier. She was warm in the specific way of people who have experienced profound loss and come out the other side with the specific softened quality that grief sometimes produces in people who let it do its work. I liked her. I want to be clear about that. I liked Viv when I met her. I liked her through the courtship and through the engagement and through the wedding, which was small and honest and in the backyard of the house on Mercer Street. I stood beside my father and watched him make a promise to someone, and I felt the specific complicated warmth of a daughter who loves her father and wants his happiness even when happiness arrives in a form that reorganizes everything. I liked Viv for 2 full years after the wedding. The liking changed in year 3, not dramatically. Through the specific accumulation of small things that individually explained themselves and collectively told a story I did not want to read. The first small thing was the utility accounts. I had taken over the utility accounts when my father's cognitive decline began in year 2 of his illness, a slow neurological condition that had started affecting his executive function, his memory for recent events, the specific administrative machinery of daily life that he had always managed precisely. I had called the utility companies. I had arranged to have the accounts transferred to my name, not because anyone asked me to, because the bills were going unpaid and the accounts were in arrears and someone needed to put their name on them and pay them reliably. I was that someone. I was always that someone. The accounts transferred to my name in the spring of year 2, gas, electric, water, internet, trash collection, 5 accounts, my name, my payment information, my money, every month for 72 months. I told Viv I had done it. She said thank you. She said it with the warmth she still had in year 2. The second small thing happened in year 3. Viv started asking questions about the estate, not at me, around me, at family dinners, in conversations with my father that I was adjacent to rather than part of, questions about the house, about what my father intended, about whether things were documented correctly, about Howard, about the will. I noted the questions. I said nothing. The third small thing was the most specific. In year 4, Viv asked me if I was still planning to use my old bedroom when I visited. She said it with warmth. She said she was thinking of using it for her craft projects. She said she hoped I did not mind. I said I visited every Sunday. She said of course. She said the craft projects could wait. I said I would appreciate that. She said of course. The craft projects moved in 3 weeks later. I did not use the bedroom after that. I visited on Sundays. I sat in the living room with my father. I drove 40 minutes each way. I paid the utility bills every month. I said nothing about the bedroom. I added it to the list of things I noted. I kept the list. I kept the bills. I am a property manager. I have been for 9 years. I manage 12 residential properties across 3 neighborhoods. I understand better than most people what it means to maintain a property. I understand what it costs. I understand what happens when maintenance is deferred and bills go unpaid and accounts lapse. I understand that a house is not a symbolic object. It is a system. It requires continuous inputs to remain functional. Someone has to pay the gas. Someone has to pay the electric. Someone has to call the plumber when the pipe under the kitchen sink develops a slow leak in February. I paid the gas. I paid the electric. I called the plumber. I also, because I am a property manager and property managers keep records, documented everything. Every bill, every payment, every maintenance call, every vendor visit, not because I suspected I would need them, because documentation was the standard of care in my profession, and I applied it to the house on Mercer Street the same way I applied it to the 12 properties I managed professionally. This was not calculation. This was habit, the habit that saved everything. My father's condition had a name I will not use because names make people into diagnoses, and my father was never a diagnosis to me. He was a man who had spent 37 years of marriage loving my mother and 3 years of grief, learning to live without her, and 4 years of a second chapter that had not turned out the way any of us had planned. His memory for recent events was unreliable. His memory for older events was clear. He remembered the Sunday arrangement. Every week when I arrived, he was at the door. He said, "I have been waiting." I said, "I know." He said, "Sit down." He said, "I will make the coffee." He made the coffee the way he had always made it, the specific ritual of a man who had been making Sunday coffee for 40 years. We sat at the kitchen table. We talked about the things he remembered clearly. my mother, the house when it was new, the oak tree, me at various ages that he could access more reliably than last Tuesday. Viv moved around the house during these visits. She was present but not at the table. She had learned over 4 years that the Sunday arrangement was not hers to join, not because I excluded her, because my father did not include her. He sat with me and he made the coffee and he talked about the things he remembered clearly. Viv had craft projects. Howard called on a Tuesday. The estate planning session was Saturday. I had 4 days. I spent them pulling files. The utility accounts went back 6 years, 5 accounts, 72 months each. 360 individual statements, each one showing my name at the top, my payment at the bottom, the address in the middle, Mercer Street, the house I had grown up in. I organized them by account and by year. I labeled each folder. I created a summary document, 1 page, clean, my name, 6 accounts, 72 months, total payments over 6 years. The number was significant, $43,800. Not a number I had ever added up before. I had been paying it in monthly increments and had never calculated the total because calculating the total would have required me to think about it as a number rather than as an obligation, and I had preferred to think about it as an obligation. I looked at the number, $43,800. 72 months of keeping a house alive, while my bedroom held craft projects. While my stepmother told Howard Bassett I had abandoned it, I put the summary on top of the folders, I added the maintenance records, every vendor invoice, the plumber in February of year 2, the electrician who replaced the panel in year 3, the roofer who patched the section above the kitchen in year 4, the HVAC technician who serviced the system twice a year for 6 years. All of it, documented, dated, paid, in my name. I drove to the house on the Thursday before Saturday. My father was having a good day. He was at the kitchen table with a crossword. He said, "I have been waiting." I said, "I know." I said, "Dad, I need to ask you something." He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you know that I pay the utilities here?" He said, "Of course." He said, "You have been doing that for years." He said, "You took over when I could not keep track." He said you would handle it. He said, "You have always handled it." I said, "Yes." He said, "Is something wrong?" I said, "No." I said, "I just wanted to hear you say it." He said, "Of course I know." He said, "Vera handles it." He said he told Howard the same thing when Howard asked. I said, "When did Howard ask?" He said at the Friday meeting. He said Howard asked about the house expenses. He said he told Howard Vera handles all of that. He said Viv said something, but he could not remember exactly what. He said his memory for recent things was not good. He said, but he knew I handled the house. He said he had always known. I said, "Thank you, Dad." He said, "Sit down." He said, "I will make the coffee." I sat down. He made the coffee. We talked about the oak tree. If you have ever been told you abandoned something you were quietly keeping alive while someone else was inside it, telling the people who mattered a different story, stay with me and subscribe. Because Saturday morning is when Howard Bassett saw 6 years of utility bills and understood exactly what the word abandoned actually meant in this situation. Saturday morning, Howard Bassett's office. Clean and precise in the way of attorneys who have been practicing for 30 years and have stopped needing to perform authority because they simply have it. My father sat in the chair closest to Howard's desk. He was having a moderate day, present but not sharp, the specific in-between that his condition produced more often now. Viv sat beside him. She was wearing the warm version of herself, the one that read as concerned wife and devoted partner. I sat across from them, my folder on my lap, the summary document on top. Howard sat behind his desk. He looked at me when I came in with the folder. His expression did not change. He was a professional, but I had been watching people's expressions for 34 years, and I saw the specific small thing that happened in his eyes when he saw the folder. He had not known I would bring this much. He had told me to bring documentation. He had not expected documentation of this scale. He said, "Thank you all for coming." He said he wanted to start by reviewing some matters that had come up in the preliminary meeting. He said there had been some questions about the property maintenance and the household expenses and the extent of family involvement in the day-to-day management of the home. Viv said she wanted to say something. Howard said in a moment. He looked at me. He said, "Vera, I mentioned when we spoke Tuesday that some statements had been made about your involvement with the property. He said I would like to give you the opportunity to respond to those statements." I said, "Yes." I said, "Thank you, Howard." I placed the summary document on his desk. I said, "This is a summary of the utility accounts associated with the Mercer Street property for the past 6 years. I said all 5 utility accounts, gas, electric, water, internet, and trash collection, are registered in my name. I said all payments have been made from my account. I said monthly. I said without interruption. I said the total amount paid over 6 years is $43,800. Howard read the summary. He read it with the focused attention of a man confirming what a document says rather than deciding whether to believe it. He set it down. He said, "Do you have the supporting statements?" I placed the first folder on his desk. Gas, 72 months. He opened it. He looked at the first statement, my name, the address, my payment. He looked at 3 more. He closed it. I placed the second folder, electric. He did the same. I placed the third, water. I placed the fourth, internet. I placed the fifth, trash. Then I placed the maintenance folder, vendor invoices going back 6 years, the plumber, the electrician, the roofer, the HVAC service, all of it, dated, documented, paid. Howard looked at the stack of folders on his desk. He looked at Viv. She was looking at the folders. Her warm expression had done the thing I had seen expressions do in every confrontation in this story and in every confrontation before this story. It had gone still. The specific stillness of a person who prepared a version of events and is watching that version become untenable in real time. Howard said, "Vivian." She said nothing. He said, "You told me in our Friday meeting that Vera had abandoned the property." She said, "I said she was not involved." He said, "You used the word abandoned." He said, "I wrote it in my notes." He said, "I wrote it because it was specific and because it was relevant to your suggestion about how the property should be handled in the estate plan." She said, "I meant she was not present." Howard said, "Vera has been paying $43,800 in household utilities and maintenance for 6 years. He said that is not absent. He said that is not uninvolved. He said that is the primary financial maintainer of the property." Viv looked at my father. He was looking at the folders. He said, "Vera handles the house." He said it clearly, with the specific clarity that his good moments still produced. He said she has been handling it for years. He said, "I told you that." He was looking at Viv when he said it. She looked at the desk. Howard looked at me. He said, "Vera, I want to apologize for not requesting this documentation before the Friday meeting." He said I should have spoken with all parties before drawing any preliminary conclusions. He said the estate plan will reflect an accurate picture of the property's maintenance history. He said I want to be clear about that. I said, "Thank you, Howard." He said, "Is there anything else you would like me to have on file?" I said, "I also have a record of every Sunday visit for the past 4 years." He looked at me. I said, "I keep a personal log." I said, "Dates and times." I said, "It is habit." I said, "I am a property manager." I said, "I document things." He said, "Yes." He said, "Please leave a copy." I placed the visit log on top of the folders. 212 Sunday visits, everyone dated. Viv was looking at the window. My father was looking at the oak tree visible through Howard's office window. He said, "That tree looks like the one in our yard." I said, "It does a little, Dad." He said, "Your mother loved that tree." I said, "I know." He said, "She planted it when you were 4. I said yes. He said it is still there. I said yes. I said it is still there. The conversation with Viv happened in the parking lot, not because I planned it, because she was beside her car when I came out and we were alone for the first time since before Howard's call. She said, "I did not think you would have all of that." I said, "I know." She said, "I thought." She stopped. I said, "Say it." She said, "I thought no one was keeping track." I said, "I always keep track." She said, "I can see that." She said, "I did not know about the utility accounts." I said, "I told you in year 2 when I set them up." She said, "I did not realize the accounts were still in your name." I said, "They have always been in my name." I said, "They have been in my name for 6 years." She said, "I thought they had transferred at some point." I said, "They never transferred." I said, "They were always mine." She said, "I genuinely did not know that." She said, "I want you to know that." She said, "I thought the house expenses were handled differently." I said, "How did you think they were handled?" She said, "I thought your father managed them." I said, "My father cannot manage his own calendar." She said, "I know." She said, "I know that now." She said, "I thought." She stopped. I said, "What did you think, Viv?" She looked at the parking lot. She said, "I thought the house would go to my children." She said, "Through the estate." She said, "I thought your father intended that." She said, "I thought you had stepped away." She said, "I thought you had made peace with it." I said, "I drove 40 minutes every Sunday for 4 years." I said, "I paid $43,800 in utilities and maintenance." I said, "I called plumbers and roofers and electricians." I said, "I sat at that kitchen table every Sunday and drank coffee with my father while he told me about my mother." She said, "I know." She said, "I see that now." She said, "I should have asked you directly." She said, "Instead, I told Howard something that was not accurate." She said, "I'm sorry for that." I looked at her. She had the specific expression of a woman who had built a version of events around an assumption and had not examined the assumption closely enough to discover it was wrong. Not a monster. A woman who had wanted something and had decided the wanting justified the telling. I said, "Viv." She said, "Yes." I said, "My father is still here." She said, "I know." I said, "I am going to keep coming on Sundays." She said, "I know." I said, "I am going to keep paying the utilities." She said, "I know." I said, "The house is not going to your children." She said, "I understand that now." I said, "Howard understands that now." She said, "Yes." I said, "Then we know where we stand." She said, "Yes." She said, "Vera." I said, "Yes." She said, "I did not know your mother." She said, "I only know what Robert has told me." She said, "From what he has told me, she was remarkable." She said, "I am sorry I handled this the way I did." She said, "I am sorry I used the word I used." I said, "I know." She said, "I will not do it again." I said, "I know that too." She got in her car. I stood in the parking lot for a moment. The Saturday morning was cold and clear. I thought about my mother, the bedroom at the top of the stairs, the oak tree, the specific quality of Sunday mornings in that house when everything was still whole. Then I drove to Mercer Street. My father was at the table when I arrived. He said, "I have been waiting." I said, "I know." He said, "I will make the coffee." He made it the way he had always made it. We sat. He said, "How was Howard?" I said, "Fine." He said, "Did you sort everything out?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Good." He said, "Vera?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I always know you are there." I said, "I know Dad." He said, "I cannot always say the right things." He said, "My memory is not what it was." He said, "But I always know you are there." I said, "I know." He said, "The coffee is hot." I said, "Yes." He said, "Drink it before it goes cold." I said, "I will." I drank the coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. Outside the window, the oak tree moved in the November wind, the one my mother had planted when I was 4. Still there, still moving, still exactly where she had put it. Howard updated the estate documents the following week. The property maintenance history was formally noted. My contribution to the household was documented in the file. The estate plan reflected my father's actual intentions rather than the version that had been presented to Howard on a Friday afternoon. I did not ask what the estate plan contained specifically. That was not why I had brought the folders. I had brought the folders because someone had said I had abandoned something I had been keeping alive. I had brought the folders because the word abandoned was sitting in Howard's notes next to my name. I had brought the folders because my mother's house deserved an accurate record. The record was accurate now. That was sufficient. I still pay the utilities, every month on the 15th, 5 accounts, my name, the gas, and the electric, and the water, and the internet, and the trash collection. The specific infrastructure of a house that has been standing for 34 years, and that contains a kitchen table and a Sunday arrangement and an oak tree outside the window. I still drive 40 minutes. I still arrive on Sunday. My father is still at the door. He still says I have been waiting. He still makes the coffee the way he has always made it. We still sit at the kitchen table. He still tells me about my mother. The Sunday arrangement continues. It has always continued. Nobody abandoned anything. The bills said so. The visit log said so. My father said so. The oak tree said so in the way trees say things. By still being there. Still exactly where she put it. Still. I want to tell you about the filing cabinet. It is a 2-drawer unit. Gray. Unremarkable. It sits beside my desk in my home office between the window and the bookshelf. I bought it in year 1 of my property management career because I understood from the first week that documentation was not optional. It was the difference between a claim and a proof. The bottom drawer contains the professional files, the 12 properties, the vendor contacts, the lease agreements, the maintenance schedules. The top drawer contains the personal files, my own documents, my own accounts, and behind those, the Mercer Street folders, 6 years of utility bills, 5 accounts, 360 statements. Everyone dated, everyone with my name at the top, everyone with the address in the middle, everyone with the payment at the bottom. I did not keep them because I suspected I would need them. I kept them because I was a property manager, and property managers keep records, and I applied the same standard to my father's house that I applied to everything else. The habit saved the house, not the deed, not a trust, not a partnership agreement, utility bills, the most ordinary documents in most people's recycling bins. Mine were in a filing cabinet, dated and labeled and organized by account and year, ready for a Saturday morning in November when someone in an attorney's office needed to understand what the word abandoned actually meant. They were ready. They were always ready. That is my story. 6 years, 5 accounts, $43,800, and a filing cabinet that most people would have thrown away, and that turned out to be the most important thing in the room on a Saturday morning in November. Keep your utility bills, not because you expect to need them, because the day someone tells a lawyer you abandoned something you were quietly keeping alive, you want 72 months of evidence that says otherwise. Keep the gas bill, keep the electric bill, keep the water bill, keep the maintenance invoices, keep the visit log, keep everything that proves you showed up, because showing up leaves a paper trail if you let it. And paper trails speak in rooms where your voice has not been invited. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.